Hello, and welcome to this short reflection on the recent Catholic Unscripted Chicago Roadshow. Gavin, Catherine and I were very fortunate to be invited to visit Chicago for a series of meetings, talks and interviews. When was the last time you heard anyone recommend Chicago, Illinois for a Catholic retreat or pilgrimage? I'm going to take a wild guess and say the answer is never. Well, when my friends heard that I was going to visit Chicago with my friends from Catholic Unscripted, I received quite a few troubled looks and not to mention messages of concern. Perhaps this is because Chicago is, after all, somewhat synonymous with gun violence. It regularly attracts attention from the press, from politicians, and especially advocates on both sides of the firearms debate in the United States. The New York Times recently ran a series of articles on shootings in the city of Chicago, where the Reverend Michael Flager, a prominent anti-violence activist and pastor on the city's south side, described Chicago as the poster boy of violence in America. This was borne out somewhat upon our arrival at Chicago's O'Hare Airport, where immediately all the news seemed to be of riots downtown. That news brought on a flurry of worried phone calls from home, but no one needed to fret. In the event, we were actually based in Mundelein, which is rather a pleasant suburb, about an hour or so outside of the city centre. It's also the site of the famous St Mary of the Lake Seminary, whose former rector in 2012 was none other than Bishop Robert Barron. This is the major seminary and graduate school of theology for the Archdiocese of Chicago. The students here will go on to serve as priests of the Archdiocese of Chicago, as well as for nearly 30 other dioceses across the country. It was founded by the first Bishop of Chicago, William J. Quarter, and was granted a charter in 1844 by the state of Illinois, with power to confer such academical or honorary degrees as are usually conferred by similar institutions. Chicago welcomed it as the first institution of higher learning in the city, and it flourished. In 1921, Archbishop George Mundelein opened the schools of philosophy and theology as St Mary of the Lake Seminary under the original 1844 charter. Archbishop Mundelein had a grand vision for the impact of the new seminary, and he was proud to dedicate it on May 25, 1924, and show it off in 1926, when it was used as a site for the International Eucharistic Congress. In 1929, Cardinal Mundelein obtained a 5-year grant from the Sacred Congregation of Seminaries and Universities in Rome to establish a pontifical faculty of theology at Mundelein, with the power to confer the international degrees of the Catholic Church, the baccalaureate, the licentiate, and doctorate in theology. In September 1934, this temporary grant was made permanent, and the seminary became the first American institution to be honoured as a pontifical theological faculty under the new Apostolic Constitution, Deus Scientiarum Domnibus. The town was beautiful and very friendly. We were frequent visitors to Emil's pub for victuals and discussion. The pizza and chicken wings were particularly good, and the Guinness was pretty decent too, I have to say. The seminary is set in beautiful grounds where wild deer roam among the various buildings, and actually caught us quite by surprise the first time we saw them returning one evening in the dark. Just as Chicago was immediately far more benign than its reputation, the communities we visited similarly defied expectations, or perhaps I should say reputations, in a rather spectacular way. At one early meeting we had, a wonderful devoted Catholic lady explained how when moving to Chicago from, I think it was Texas, a friend told her, "You'll love Chicago, everyone is Catholic." And she was extremely puzzled to make sure, and had to make sure that her friend hadn't made a mistake. When she arrived, however, she found that the doctor was Catholic, the dentist was Catholic, the people who owned the store, basically everyone. And we soon found out, just starting a conversation in the pub led to Catholic revelations. It seemed like everyone was indeed Catholic. Each one of the communities we met and worshipped with revealed a different side of the Catholic faith in Chicago. One of our first stops was the town of Volo, where we found an absolutely exquisite parish church, St. Peter's, which was serving a thriving Catholic community who had recently started their own Catholic school, the Chesterton Academy. We met an inspirational lady called May Wilson, who serves as the executive director, as well as Dan Gennaro, the head teacher. Dan had taken a pay cut to teach at a proper Catholic school with an amazing ethos and curriculum. The academy is small, but utterly brilliant. They follow the Socratic method of teaching with a rigorous focus on classic literature, philosophy, science, mathematics, history and Latin. Students begin every day with Mass and additionally participate in fine arts programs which include art, choir, drama and ballroom dance. At the beginning of every school year, the faculty and staff take an oath of fidelity to the magisterium of the Catholic Church. We had a very fruitful meeting, which gave us lots of ideas we felt were transferable to our work with DICE, the Defence of the Integrity of Catholic Education, and Catholic education in general in this country. Catherine and Dan were brainstorming at the whiteboard, and we were all very impressed and enthused with the way the Academy had taken on the challenge of educating the next generation of Catholics. We felt there was an immediate meeting of minds. Our next visit was to Mass at Marytown, which is the National Shrine of St. Maximilian Kolbe. It's a large complex with a beautiful church rivaling any in Europe and featuring marble facades, stunning side chapels, a coffered ceiling, Corinthian capitals, and with perpetual Eucharistic adoration, which you can experience yourself through live stream. Even the weekday masses are packed with worshippers, and after the liturgy, there are still lots of people moving around the chapels, lighting candles and saying prayers. It really reminded me of visiting the great shrines of Europe, except those churches in Europe are usually full of tourists chatting and taking pictures, whereas everyone at Marytown was a devout Catholic engaged in prayer, adoration and worship. There is also a very moving museum to the horrors experienced in the concentration camp by St. Maximilian. The liturgy there was excellent. It was the Novus Ordo with really solid preaching, a very reverent liturgy of the Eucharist, and, interestingly, two prie-dieu placed out for Holy Communion. And this made it really easy for communicants to kneel to receive the Blessed Sacrament. It's a small and simple innovation which seems to me to welcome greater reverence, and in response to lots of people were going up and kneeling. I'd say the vast majority probably. It was great to see so much genuine reverence on display. St. Mary of the Angels was the venue for our first talk. We had a sing-song of our favourite hymns as we drove into town, where we were met in the car park by Father Ryan Brady. It was freezing cold and Father Ryan sported a fedora and a stylish overcoat. We all thought he looked just like a gangster. Father Ryan gave us a tour of the church building, along with a little history of the place. Father Ryan later spoke to Gavin in his podcast about being a priest in Chicago, and I highly recommend if you haven't listened already that you take a moment to listen to that. It's well worth it. St. Mary of the Angels is an enormous and spectacular example of the Polish cathedral style of churches, which are modelled on St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. It's one of a number of monumental Polish churches visible from the Kennedy Expressway, a tangible landmark, sign and witness to the faith. The parish was originally founded to serve the large number of Poles who'd settled in Bucktown, which was part of Chicago's Polish downtown. The Archdiocese purchased 2 city blocks totaling 96 lots at the corner of Hermitage and Cortland, formerly Clybourne Place, for just $60,000. One block was subdivided for residences, while the other became the site of the parish. The first pastor, Reverend Francis Gordon, laid the cornerstone of the first building at 1810 North Hermitage Avenue, now used as the school, which we also toured while we were there, on the 2nd of July 1899. The church contained everything for the parishioners' spiritual and social life. The basement housed meeting rooms, a gymnasium, and an auditorium. The main floor contained 12 classrooms and a convent quarters, while the second floor held the sanctuary with living quarters for the priests in the attic. After the tour, we attended Mass, and then went downstairs to give our talk to a really lively audience which included the parish RCIA group. The feedback we received was excellent, and we had lots of really interesting interactions and questions that kept us engaged for several hours. It was a brilliant way to start our time in Chicago, as we felt immediately part of the Catholic community. This is for me a real Catholic thing. Wherever I am in the world, once I get to Mass and get my Catholic bearings, I feel like I'm comfortable. I'm at home with my international family, and that's something really rather special and unique about being a Catholic. It's important because it's demonstrative of the way that Catholic faith embraces all people, wherever you are in the world. The next day, we were interviewed for a Catholic radio station called WFSI, and once again, we were shocked by the intimacy and familial welcome we received. The integrity and honesty of the faithful Catholics we encountered everywhere we visited was extremely moving, and the very real and none more than the audience at this venue. They asked us very interesting questions and asked if we could pray the Divine Mercy Chaplet together at the end. What a privilege that was. Again, the same feeling at Santa Maria del Popolo, a parish with 40% Mexican congregation. We were struck by the authenticity and the engagement, the genuine interest and concern about the faith, and most interestingly and affirming, we found that we were all on the same page. At both of these venues, we were prompted somewhat by the concerns and cares expressed by the questions we were asked. I kept thinking of John 10:27. My sheep hear my voice, I know them and they follow me. Wherever you go in the world, the faithful recognise the faith. We share it in such a powerful and glorious way. Later in the week, we were taken to St. John Cantius, a church community famous for its unique and sumptuous Baroque interior, spectacular liturgy, and affiliation with the Canons Regular of St. John Cantius, whose special charism is the restoration of the sacred. To that end, they have gathered quite an extraordinary treasure trove of beautiful sacred objects, artifacts and relics, which really rivaled anything I've ever seen. We had experienced a week of wonderful fellowship, of open and honest witness to the faith, of sharing our own very personal testimonies, and at this point in our journey, we were all on a real spiritual high. We felt full of the Holy Spirit, and as one beautiful religious treasure after another was revealed to us, Catherine in particular was quite literally overwhelmed by the beauty of it all. As well as exquisite, uplifting worship, the wonderful canons welcomed us, fed us, and plied us with a fantastic homemade limoncello. The fellowship was superb, and the whole community is just immersed in Catholicism. And they have built an extraordinary parish community with nearly 40 new Catholics received into the church last Easter, and 16 already signed up for RCIA this year. They are thriving and in demand, and so it's difficult to reconcile with the current antipathy of Rome to our wonderful heritage and tradition. When you see traditionally minded parishes drawing in huge numbers, growing, and bringing large numbers to Christ, you have to recognise that the Holy Spirit is the Holy Spirit who will lead us away from sin and towards a holy life. That, as the Holy Spirit is the Spirit of truth, he will lead us to the truth and not into doctrinal or moral error. In other words, the complete opposite of the discernment arising from a meeting, seminar or synod of people pushing sinful and heretical ideas. There were lots of really special moments on this trip. Perhaps for me, one of the most poignant experiences was sharing Mass in the small chapel at Santa Maria del Popolo in Mundelein, which served as our base parish. It was just the three of us, Gavin, Catherine, and myself, along with our priest. I was asked to read the psalm, and it turned out that the psalm of the day was Psalm 34, which is very special to my wife and I, and it is engraved on our daughter Ruth's grave. I couldn't believe it. After a week of telling my story, which can be quite painful and wasn't something I'd really planned to do, this was very clearly God reaching out to me in an extremely intimate way, touching my heart and consoling me. At communion, we all knelt, and Father gave us both species of the Eucharist. After the Mass, Gavin revealed to us that this was the first time he had ever received Holy Communion under both kinds as a Catholic. It was amazing because we'd been discussing Eucharistic reverence and all these kinds of issues all week. And then in this little chapel together at a quiet shared mass, there was so much divine providence which spoke so deeply to each one of us and our own personal experiences. I never thought I would have enjoyed so much spiritual fruit from a trip to the USA, but I could not recommend it highly enough. I came home saying to people, don't go on retreat to Rome. Instead, try Chicago. Thank you for listening.